What would you do if the one person you were trained to destroy became the only one who has ever truly seen you? She is a DEA agent, sworn to hunt down the cartel that destroyed countless lives. He is the Cartel Heir, raised in blood, shadows, and violence. During a failed operation, their worlds collide, and something impossible sparks between them. What grows between them is forbidden, dangerous, and deadly. Stay with me until the end, because what you're about to discover might change the way you see love, loyalty, and the thin line between justice and desire. Before we go any deeper into this story, take a moment to subscribe and like this video. It helps us bring even more intense, emotional, forbidden love stories to you. And if you're already feeling the tension, then drop a comment and tell me where you're watching from. Trust me, you don't want to miss what comes next. Have you ever wondered what would happen if the person you spent your whole life fighting against turned out to be the only one capable of touching parts of your heart you thought were long dead? It sounds impossible, almost irrational, but that's exactly what happens when a dedicated DEA agent crosses paths with the one man she was trained to bring down, the heir to the most violent cartel along the border. She has spent years studying every step of the cartel. She carries the weight of the dead, the weight of guilt, the weight of justice. Her world is duty, sacrifice, and constant fear. Meanwhile, he was born into a world of guns, blood, and power. A world he never chose, but one he could never escape. You ever felt this? That strange pull towards someone who contradicts everything you believe, everything you stand for, everything you swore to destroy? Because that's what happens the first time they meet. Not by choice, but by chaos. A gunfight, an explosion, a moment where death feels inches away, and then he saves her. 1 second, one touch, one look, and everything inside her shifts. She should hate him. He should run from her. But fate doesn't care about rules, especially when two broken souls recognize each other. What you're about to see is not just a story about love. It's a story about danger, betrayal, loyalty, secrets, and the forbidden spark between two enemies trapped between duty and desire. Stay with me until the end, because the choices they make will leave you breathless. The night was quieter than usual along the border, quiet in a way that felt wrong. The DEA agent sensed the air growing heavier around her, as if the desert itself knew what was about to happen. The plan was simple: monitor the abandoned warehouse where the cartel stored weapons and wait for the exact moment to strike. But simple plans are often dangerous illusions, and she knew that. Every agent does. Still, that day was different. There was a feeling she couldn't shake, a strange vibration in her chest that she tried to ignore, but that clung to her every second. From atop the hill, she watched the warehouse through thermal lenses. Quick movements, shadows darting in and out, trucks being unloaded. Everything followed the usual pattern until someone appeared. A steady presence, a stride that carried authority without arrogance. He wasn't like the others, too young to be leading, too calm to be just another cartel soldier. She didn't know who he was, but something inside her froze when he lifted his face for a second and looked straight in her direction, as if he could sense her presence from an impossible distance. In that moment, without even knowing his name, she understood that this operation would not be like the others. The DEA team advanced silently, weapons raised, orders tight and precise. But the cartel was already waiting. Gunfire ripped through the desert like a sudden storm. Glass shattered, shouts echoed, dust rose in thick clouds like the smoke of war. She moved through the shadows, calculating each step, until an explosion knocked her to the ground, forcing the air from her lungs. When she tried to get up, she saw one of the vehicles burning just a few feet away and realized she was surrounded. That was when the impossible happened. He appeared, the same man she'd seen from the hill, the heir, though she didn't know it yet. He walked toward her in the middle of the crossfire, as if the world had slipped into slow motion. He didn't point a gun at her, didn't shout commands, didn't attack. He simply looked into her eyes as if trying to decipher who she was, or why he couldn't just leave her there to die, as he should have. "Don't move," he said, but there was no threat in his voice. There was something else. A restless curiosity, as if this encounter had happened before somewhere inside him, even before it happened in reality. Dazed, she reached for her weapon. He noticed the movement, but didn't react. There was no fear in his expression. There was recognition. The most confusing second of her life stretched into a strange silence between them, while bullets screamed around them, creating an absurd contrast, chaos outside, and an inexplicable calm between the two of them. It made no sense. They were enemies. They were raised to destroy each other. And yet, in that moment, the world seemed to step aside so they could exist in the same space. He made a decision that would change everything. He extended his hand. Not to strike her, but to help her stand. She should have refused, but something inside her, something without logic, only instinct, made her hesitate. And in that millisecond, entire lives shift their course. When she finally rose, supported by his hand, they stared at each other as if they had just crossed a line they could never uncross. And before either could speak a word, a car sped toward them. He grabbed her, pulling her back and shielding her with his body as the vehicle screeched past, kicking up dust and detonating the tension around them. In that instant, she understood how serious it was. The man who was supposed to be her target had just saved her life. And he knew it too, because the way he let her go, slowly, almost regretfully, said more than any explanation ever could. They didn't exchange names. They didn't exchange information. But they exchanged something far more dangerous, a secret, one that could destroy them both. She returned to the DEA base with her whole body, aching, but the pain that bothered her most wasn't the bruised shoulder or the cut above her eyebrow. It was something else, something she couldn't name, something that had started the moment his hand touched hers in the middle of the gunfire. During the official report, she recounted everything. The ambush, the explosion, the cartel's reaction, the escape routes she suspected they were using. But she never mentioned what had truly happened in that corner of the warehouse. She didn't speak of the man who should have let her die. She didn't mention the way he looked at her. She said nothing about that quick, almost guilty touch of someone who knew he had crossed a line. She tried to ignore it, tried to treat it like an irrelevant detail. But when she got home that night, to the tiny apartment she barely saw because she was always on missions, she couldn't sleep for the first time in a very long time. It wasn't adrenaline, it wasn't fear. It was a face, a pair of eyes that kept returning to her memory over and over, a gesture, the way he had pulled her out of the path of that speeding car, as if protecting her had been a reflex, not a decision. "He's just another criminal," she repeated to herself, staring at the ceiling. Just another one. But her heart didn't believe it. The next morning, she did what any trained agent would do. She went back to reports, videos, files, anything that could give her a hint of who had really been leading that cartel operation. Because if there was anything worse than feeling connected to the wrong person, it was not knowing that person's name. She walked into the monitoring room and asked for access to security footage captured by drones and cameras during the operation. She reviewed every second of the confrontation, frame by frame, until she reached the moment she was on the ground, dizzy and disoriented. And there he was, walking toward her as if the chaos around him didn't affect him at all. She froze. The image zoomed in. His face grew clearer. A firm jaw, heavy eyes, the posture of someone raised to command, not obey. A shiver ran down her spine. "Who are you?" she whispered, alone, in English, as if he could hear her through the screen. Hours later, she found what she was searching for. In the middle of old dossiers, satellite photos, and cross-referenced intelligence reports, a name began to repeat in discreet notes, always tied to the cartel leader, but never in the spotlight. Miguel Herrera, the eldest son, educated abroad, used as the clean intermediary in business deals, shell companies, and legitimate contracts. Most agents dismissed that information. To them, he was just the paperwork kid, the business side of his father's empire. But when she re-watched the footage from the warehouse, she knew that wasn't true. No one looks at another person like that if they are completely outside the war. Miguel Herrera. She repeated the name several times under her breath, as if testing how it tasted on her tongue. Something inside her tightened, a knot that had nothing professional about it. From then on, the job stopped being just a job. Every new piece of information about the cartel came with a new filter. Where was he? Did he attend this meeting? What was the last country he traveled to? Who was with him? Without realizing it, she stopped mapping the cartel and started mapping his life. Of course, she knew the risk. She knew she couldn't mix work with emotion. She knew an agent must never be affected by a target, but the human mind is stubborn, and the heart is even worse. It's not about him, she tried to justify. It's about the case, about understanding the structure. He's the key. But deep down, very deep down, she knew the line had been crossed the moment he pulled her away from that speeding car. Across the border, he wasn't sleeping well either. Miguel kept remembering her eyes, the shock, the anger, and something else he didn't want to admit: respect. How many times had he seen agents screaming, panicking, trembling, begging for their lives, but not her? Even on the ground, dizzy and hurt, she still reached for her gun, still looked him straight in the eye without lowering her gaze. That image stuck to him like a mark he couldn't erase. He didn't know her name. He didn't know what unit she belonged to. He only knew one thing. If she had died there, part of him would have remained trapped inside that burning warehouse. And that scared him more than any rival cartel ever could. This is how true obsession begins, not with declarations of love, but with silence, with unanswered questions, with a face that returns when the world finally quiets down. She began hunting for his name. He began fearing him and craving the idea of seeing her again. And fate, which loves to play with fires that should never touch, was already preparing their next encounter. This time, there would be no gunfight, no explosion, just a choice that could change everything. 3 weeks had passed since the incident at the warehouse, 3 weeks in which she tried, unsuccessfully, to treat Miguel Herrera as just another name on a report, just another target on the DEA's long list. But it was impossible. Every new document she read, every old photograph, every intercepted recording, only increased the feeling that this man carried more layers than any file could ever show. And worse, it intensified the uncontrollable desire to look into his eyes again, just to discover whether what she felt that night had been real or merely adrenaline. But she wouldn't have to wait long. On a humid morning, as she arrived for what she expected to be another ordinary day, she found her boss leaning against the door of the briefing room. He was holding a thick black folder, the kind that only appeared when something serious was about to happen. "We need to talk. Now," he said in a tone she knew very well. They entered the silent room, and he placed the folder on the table with enough force to make the metal lock vibrate. "We got a call from Mexico City about an agreement. An intermediary wants to negotiate intel on the Herrera cartel, but only if it's with you." Her heart stopped for a second, not because of the negotiation, but because of the words. "Only if it's with you." "Who's the intermediary?" she asked, trying to keep her voice steady. He looked at her with a mixture of suspicion and concern. "Miguel Herrera." The name dropped between them like a gunshot. She pretended not to react, but her stomach twisted painfully. Miguel had asked to speak with her, and that meant two dangerous things. He remembered her. He wanted something only she could provide. The details came quickly. A meeting on neutral ground, no weapons, no handcuffs, no visible escorts. The kind of arrangement any agent would consider suicidal. But she accepted before her boss could even finish his sentence. Hours later, she crossed the border in an armored SUV, her mind a storm of doubts. Why me? What does he know? Is this a trap? Or, worse, what if it's not? The meeting place was an abandoned, century-old church, standing halfway between nowhere and nothing. When she stepped inside, the sun filtered through the broken windows, creating beams of light that made the place feel sacred and dangerous at the same time. And he was there, leaning against the wall, arms crossed, as if he had been waiting much. Longer than scheduled. No weapons, no bodyguards, just the raw truth of the man she hadn't been able to erase from her memory. When their eyes met, everything she had held back for the past weeks exploded in silence. It wasn't like the first time. It was worse, because now she knew exactly who he was. And still, she felt the same impact. "I knew you'd come," he said, his rough English hitting her like a blow. Soft, precise, dangerous. She took a deep breath, trying to look unshakable. "You asked specifically for me. Why?" He took a few steps toward her, slow, calculated. "Because you saw what no one else saw that day." He stopped right in front of her, close enough for her to feel the warmth of his body. "You saw that I'm not my father." The sentence struck a vulnerable point inside her. Miguel didn't speak like a villain. He spoke like someone suffocating under a destiny he never asked for. She tried to impose distance. "If you want to negotiate, you need proof. Names. Locations, routes. I'm not here to listen to confessions." He gave a slight smile, sad almost, like she was missing something essential. "I know what you're here to do, and I know what you don't want to admit you've been feeling since that night." The air thickened, heavy, toxic, dangerous, but also impossible to refuse. "You saved my life," she said, finally breaking the silence she had fought to keep. "Why?" Miguel raised his gaze, steady, sincere, in a way that hurt. "Because for the first time in years, someone looked at me like I wasn't a monster." She felt the ground disappear beneath her. This was no longer an investigation, no longer a mission, no longer DEA versus cartel. It was something nameless, but full of consequences. He stepped closer, slowly. "I want out," he said, "and you're the only person I trust to get me out alive." The words fell inside her like fire. That was it, the beginning of the fall, the beginning of surrender, the beginning of a connection capable of destroying careers, reputations, and lives. And from that moment on, nothing, absolutely nothing, would ever be the same again. The words, "I want out," kept echoing in her mind, long after silence took over the abandoned church. It felt as though time itself had stopped to hold its breath, waiting for her reaction. A Cartel Heir asking for help from the very DEA agent who had spent years trying to destroy everything he represented. It made no sense. It wasn't logical. It certainly wasn't safe. And yet it sounded incredibly real. "Do you understand what you're saying?" she asked, trying to keep her voice neutral, professional. "There is no out in this world," he replied. "There are graves, or betrayal." Miguel didn't look away. "I know better than anyone how it works." He gave a humorless half smile. "I grew up hearing that the only exit is a bullet to the back of the head, or a closed casket. But if I stay, the end won't be much different. At least this way, I die trying to do something right." His honesty irritated her, not because it was false, but because it stirred parts of her she had spent years burying. That old desire not just to arrest criminals, but to break the cycle, to prevent more people from being swallowed by that world. She had seen teenagers, almost children, being recruited. She had seen mothers crying, fathers begging, and now, standing before her, was the monster's own son, asking not to become one himself. "You're asking for a deal?" she pressed, crossing her arms as if building a wall between them. "Witness protection, reduced sentence, information exchange, that?" "No." His answer was immediate. "I'm not asking for a deal. I'm asking for a pact." He took a few steps to the side, searching for the right words. "If I go to the DEA as just another repentant criminal, they'll use me, drain everything I know, and then toss me into some hole with a new name and a life that isn't mine. My father will hunt me until the end, and Anyone near me dies." She watched him carefully, analyzing every phrase, every gesture. There was fear in him, but there was also courage, a strange, almost suicidal courage of someone who had finally decided to stop running. "And what exactly do you want from me?" she asked, her voice coming out lower than expected, tension threading through it. Miguel drew a deep breath. "I want you to be the bridge." He looked at her with an intensity that pulled the air from the room. "You know how your world works. I know how mine works. If we do this right, we can take down part of my father's empire and at the same time, make sure he never finds out it was me. At least long enough for me to disappear. For real." She let out a short, dry laugh, more nerves than humor. "You're talking about destroying your own father, about handing over roots, schemes, names. Do you have any idea how much of a war this could start?" "I've been living in war since the day I was born," he replied. "The difference is that this time I'd be choosing the side I'm on." The sentence hung between them like a confession. She knew what it meant. Saying yes wouldn't just be another case. It would be a move capable of shifting the balance of power across the entire region. Rival cartels would move. Corrupt politicians would be exposed. Undercover agents could die. Innocents could be dragged into an even bigger conflict. And then there was something else. Something far more dangerous. Accepting meant walking beside him, planning with him, hearing him, protecting him, trusting him. It meant, in a way, placing him under her wing, and that entangled her emotionally in a way she didn't want to admit. "If I take this to the DEA, they'll use you until there's nothing left," she warned. "And if they find out that I hid anything about you, about what happened in that warehouse, I go down with you." Miguel took a step closer. She felt his presence in a way that was almost physical. "I know," he said softly. "And that's why I asked for you. Because you didn't look at me like a trophy or a name on a file. You looked at me like someone who still had a choice." Those words hit a fragile spot inside her, because deep down, they were true. She had seen something in his eyes. Something broken, but not destroyed. "And if I say no?" she whispered. He hesitated, for a single second, as if genuinely considering the possibility. "Then I go back to my world. We pretend this never happened. You keep hunting the cartel. I keep being the enemy." He tilted his head, eyes locked onto hers. "But every time you read a DEA report, you'll know I could have been your strongest weapon, and that the only person who ever reached out to me was also the one who left me behind." Silence. Heavy, suffocating silence. She felt the weight of the choice pressing down on her chest. This wasn't just about law or crime. It was about responsibility. It was about what you do when you have a real chance to change something, instead of just keeping the machine running. Deep down, she already knew the answer. Not because it was right, not because it was safe, but because saying no at that moment would betray not only him, but the person she believed herself to be. "This will destroy us," she murmured, almost to herself. Miguel breathed deeply. "Or it will be the first true thing I've ever done." She closed her eyes for a moment. When she opened them again, they were steadier. There, in the dim glow of that old church, the DEA agent and the Cartel Heir sealed something far beyond a strategic agreement. It wasn't just a plan, it was a line, one that, once crossed, had no return. "Then let's begin," she said. And without noticing, in that exact moment, she wasn't just starting an operation. She was beginning to lose, piece by piece, her ability to separate duty from desire. The meetings began discreetly, almost invisibly, always in places where no one would ever imagine seeing a DEA agent, and the air of a cartel breathing the same air, let alone sharing the same table. Abandoned gas stations, empty warehouses, desert trails, even coyotes avoided. No phone calls, no messages, only coordinates left in strategic locations and coded signals that only the two of them could understand. It was like living a second life, one no one could discover without turning them instantly into mortal enemies. It was dangerous, insane, forbidden, and yet it quickly became the moment of the day they most looked forward to. During their first meeting after the pact, she was rigid, professional, almost cold. She wanted to make it clear this was work, nothing more. He noticed the barrier, but didn't comment. He simply handed her a folder filled with information that could dismantle half of his father's operation. Names, routes, hideouts, accounts, all handwritten, because he knew any digital document could be traced. "This is only the beginning," he said, keeping his distance. "But I can't give everything at once. If my father senses even the slightest shift, we're dead, both of us." She wanted to argue, to pressure him, but something in his tone made her retreat. Miguel wasn't bluffing. He had lived in that world since childhood. He knew exactly what he was talking about. During the next meetings, their dynamic began to change. Not abruptly, but inevitably. With every new secret location, she noticed something that unsettled her deeply. Miguel was never late, never missed a meeting, never brought empty information or convenient lies. Everything he delivered matched perfectly with DEA intelligence cross-checks. It was as if, piece by piece, he was truly dismantling his own family empire. And that left her more vulnerable than any bullet ever could. Because the more he proved he was on her side, the harder it became to keep her professionalism intact. One of their tensest meetings happened in an abandoned house in Arizona, where sunlight streamed through broken windows, casting strips of brightness over dusty floors. He arrived first, sitting on the windowsill, staring at the desert, as if searching for some kind of redemption in the horizon. When she entered, Miguel stood immediately, almost instinctively, as if he respected her presence in a way he respected no one else. "I brought the next month's transport routes," he said, handing her an envelope. She opened it, analyzed it, confirmed it. Everything made sense. Everything was real. He was going too far, and she knew the risk. "If your father finds out, you're dead," she warned, slipping the envelope into her jacket. "I've been dead before," he replied with that half-sad smile. "Growing up inside a cartel is like living with a clock tied to your chest, just waiting for the day it stops." She fell silent for a few seconds, and he watched her as if trying to decipher something inside her. "You don't have to do this for me," she finally said. "It's not your responsibility to save anyone, but yourself." Miguel took 2 steps closer, stopped a few feet away, keeping the distance but not hiding the intensity in his eyes. "I'm not doing this for you," he said quietly. "I'm doing it for me, but it's easier to keep going when I know you're on the other side." Those words disarmed her in a way she wasn't prepared for. Her heart beat faster. She looked away, trying to regain focus. But then came the moment that changed everything. A meeting on a cold night at a forgotten pier in Southern California. The wind was fierce, and the water crashed hard against the wood. She was on edge. The DEA had begun pressuring her, questioning her hours, her unexplained disappearances. The danger was rising, and she needed to tell him. "We can't keep doing this," she said the second he approached. "It's becoming impossible to justify my absences. They're going to suspect." Miguel drew a tense breath, jaw tight. "I know, but I also know you're not going to stop now." She clenched her teeth, frustrated because he was right, and he knew it. "You're dragging my career into the trash," she whispered. "No." He stepped closer, close enough for her to feel the warmth of his skin despite the cold wind. "I'm trusting my life to you. And that..." He looked at her as if saying it required courage. "Is the only thing I have left." For a second, they stood so close that a fraction of movement would have been enough for something to happen. It didn't. Maybe out of caution. Maybe out of fear. But the air around them changed. They both knew it. It was no longer just work. No longer just strategy. No longer just survival. That night marked the beginning of a tension neither of them admitted, but both felt in their bones. From then on, every meeting would be harder, more intense, more impossible to control, and fate was about to trap them at the center of a danger that would make the desire between them fatal. What began as a quiet connection between two enemies quickly turned into something far more dangerous than any DEA operation could have predicted. And the first sign of that came on a night when Miguel didn't show up at the agreed time. She waited 20 minutes, then 30, then a full hour, and with every minute that passed, something inside her tightened in a way that had nothing to do with the mission, and everything to do with the man. When she finally heard footsteps, she raised her gun on instinct, but Miguel stumbled out of the shadows, breathing hard as if he had run for miles. His face was marked, a cut along his eyebrow, his shirt stained with dust and sweat. "What happened?" she asked, holstering her weapon and stepping toward him before she even realized it. "My father," he said, still trying to catch his breath. "He's starting to suspect something. Nothing specific yet. But he told me I've been acting strange. And when my father says that, it means someone is going to die." Her heart sank. "What did you say?" Her voice came out low, tense. Miguel looked at her with a kind of exhaustion that didn't belong to any specific age. "I told him I was investigating a potential infiltrator in the organization, a threat coming from inside." She felt the blood run cold. "You blamed someone? You pointed to a suspect?" He looked away. Silence. And then she understood. "You blamed me," she said, "not as an accusation, but as fact." Miguel lifted his face quickly. "Not to incriminate you, to protect you." He took a step toward her. "If my father thinks you're around because I'm trying to find you, he has me watched, not shot at you. But if he thinks you're watching him..." He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't need to. The DEA trained agents to handle danger, but no one trained them to handle someone willing to risk their own life to protect them, someone who, by all logic, should be their enemy. "You do understand this puts you in even greater danger, right?" she asked, trying to regain her emotional control. "I've lived in danger since the day I was born," Miguel replied. "The difference is that now, I finally have someone worth fighting for." That hit a place inside her far too fragile, a part she had refused to acknowledge. Until then, she had managed to separate everything. Secret meetings were part of the mission. The tension between them was just adrenaline, his eyes just a distraction. But in that moment, when she heard "someone worth fighting for," every barrier she built blurred. And the problem wasn't over. "There's more," Miguel said, running a hand through his hair, clearly exhausted. "He wants me to investigate you for real, not just on paper. He wants your address, where you work." Her eyes widened. "What did you tell him?" "I told him I was already looking into it," Miguel continued. "But I made up that you're just a secondary agent on the case, someone without direct access to the DEA's main operations. I told him you were irrelevant." She inhaled sharply. The professional part of her wanted to be offended, to say irrelevant. But the vulnerable part, the part she kept denying, understood exactly the purpose behind his choice of words. He was building her a shield, a camouflage, a justification for her presence on the cartel's radar without putting her directly in the line of fire. "And did it work?" she asked, trying to stay rational. "For now," Miguel replied, "but my father isn't stupid. He knows when something's off, and he noticed I hesitated when they asked me the last time I was at the border. Hesitation is enough for a man like him to start digging." The cold wind cut through both of them, but it wasn't the cold that made her shiver. It was the truth. They were no longer dealing with distant suspicions. The cartel was close, far too close. "What do we do?" she whispered, letting slip a part of herself she almost never showed. The human part. Miguel looked at her with an intensity that made time slow. "We don't do anything," he said. "I handle this part. You keep going like always. The less you move, the less my father notices you matter." The word hung in the air. Matter. Too heavy to be said by a criminal. Too soft to be directed at an agent. Too dangerous for either of them. She took a shaky breath, trying to push away what she felt. I can take care of myself. I know, Miguel replied, but I don't want to watch you die because of me. For a moment, they stood so close she could feel his breath. And, for the first time, she didn't step back. What she didn't know, not yet, was that the cartel had already received an internal warning. A simple, short, chilling message. Someone is leaking information. Betrayal always starts with those we trust most. And Miguel, without realizing it, was already marked. The truth is that no secret lasts forever, especially when it involves two institutions built on distrust, the DEA and a cartel. And on that day, everything began to collapse on both sides. At the same time, as if fate had decided to test exactly how far she and Miguel could go before breaking completely. At the DEA, the pressure came first. She walked into headquarters with her usual pace, coffee in hand, expression steady. But the moment she passed through the metal detector, she felt it. Stares, whispers, pauses that lasted a little too long. Nothing explicit, but enough to tighten her stomach. When she reached her desk, her boss was waiting, arms crossed, wearing that severe expression he only used when he was about to throw someone into the fire. "Close the door now," she obeyed. The moment the door clicked shut, he threw a file onto the table with force. "Mind explaining where the hell you've been these past weeks?" She kept her posture steady, but her heartbeat was already giving her away. "Field operations, data cross-checks, meetings with informants. Don't lie to me," he snapped, raising his voice just enough to show authority without losing control. "Your schedules don't match. Your routes make no sense, and you've been off-grid during moments when you were supposed to be reachable." She fought to remain calm. She was trained for moments like this. It's part of the job. You know how sensitive operations... But he leaned forward, palms planted firmly on the table. "You think I can't tell when an agent is hiding something?" He opened the folder and spread out several photographs, photos of her in remote locations, parking her car, leaving alone. GPS tracking disabled. "You have any idea what this looks like?" She swallowed hard. She knew exactly what it looked like: corruption. And if the DEA began to believe that, she was dead, not by cartel hands, but by her own government. "I'm working on a potential leak," she finally said, crossing a line she had sworn never to cross. "But I can't talk about it yet. It's big." Her boss stared at her for several long, suffocating seconds. "Big enough to risk your career?" She hesitated, and that hesitation was all he needed. "You have 48 hours to bring me something concrete. If I don't get proof, you're off the case, and suspended." She left the room with heavy legs. For the first time since meeting Miguel, she realized she wasn't just losing objectivity, she was losing control. But while the DEA was beginning to distrust her, on the other side of the border, something far more dangerous was moving. Miguel arrived late that night at his father's mansion. The armed guards watched him enter with visible irritation. It wasn't normal for the cartel prince to disappear without warning, and his father was sitting at the long table in the main hall where deals were decided and destinies sealed. "Where were you?" his father asked, his voice slicing through the air like a sharp blade. Miguel held his posture. "I was fixing a problem on one of the routes. Nothing that concerns you." His father lifted his eyes, narrowing them with a predatory stare. "One of my men went missing. Yesterday," he said. "The same one who saw you talking to yourself near the border. Coincidence?" Miguel steadied his breathing. It was a test, and failing it meant death. "Someone is leaking information about our operation," his father continued, rising slowly. "And I need to know if that someone is you." Silence. The men around them froze, waiting for the first move. Miguel felt his palms sweat, but kept his face ruthlessly still. "You want me to prove my loyalty?" he said. "Then give me a name, and I'll deal with it now." His father's eyes gleamed. "The DEA agent, the woman, who is she?" Miguel's heart stopped for a fraction of a second. He knew this was the decisive moment. If he hesitated, he died. If he said too much, she died. If he lied poorly, both would be hunted. So he did the only thing possible. He became a mirror of the enemy. "She's irrelevant," he said coldly. "But if you want a warning sent, I can take care of that. Something to make her back off." His father smiled. A smile that had nothing human in it. "Good. I want results. And if I feel for even a second that you're lying to me..." He didn't finish. He didn't have to. That night, when they met at the designated location, Miguel was different, more tense, colder. She sensed it immediately. "The cartel suspects," he said before she could ask. "And now, they want a message." Her eyes widened. "What kind of message?" Miguel ran a hand through his hair, nervous, truly nervous, for the first time since she'd met him. "A message for you." Silence fell, heavy, crushing. "And if I don't do something, you die." And in that moment, she understood. It was no longer about work, no longer about justice, no longer about the DEA or the cartel. It was about survival. And the two of them were stepping into a part of the story where a single wrong detail could cost both of them their lives. She had always known that working for the DEA meant living surrounded by daily risks, but she never imagined that one day, the greatest danger would come from someone she was trying to protect, nor that the enemy would come so close they could touch her front door. And that dawn, danger finally stopped being a theory. After the tense meeting with Miguel, she returned home with a discomfort she couldn't shake off. She couldn't sleep, couldn't eat. She could only repeat his words over and over. "They want to send a message, and if I don't do something, you die." She spent the night on alert, walking around the apartment, checking windows, rechecking locks, going over every security detail. But attacks don't come when you expect them. They come the moment you finally breathe, and that was exactly what happened. At 3:47 a.m., while she tried to rest for a few minutes on the couch, she heard a metallic click at the front door. Not the normal sound of the lock. It was subtle, precise, professional. Someone was outside, and they were trying to get in. She stood immediately, pulling her gun silently from the holster. Her heart raced, but her mind stayed cold, agent instinct. She moved to the wall, aiming at the door. The click repeated, louder, and then complete silence. For a moment, she considered calling for backup, but she didn't have time. The door exploded inward with brutal force, throwing wood and metal across the hallway. 3 masked men entered in formation. Fast, efficient, violent. They didn't say a word. She shot the first one without thinking. The bullet hit his shoulder and threw him behind the table. The second ducked and advanced with a knife. She dodged, hit his forearm, and slammed him into the wall. But the third wasn't carrying a blade or a gun. He carried a stun baton. The electric charge hit the left side of her body, locking her muscles. She fell to her knees, struggling not to black out. The man gripped her chin and lifted her face with brutal force. "Message from your friend," he said with a heavy accent. She tried to react, tried to reach the gun that had fallen near the couch. He noticed and kicked her hard, knocking her flat on the floor. He was about to shock her again when a gunshot echoed through the apartment, and the man collapsed, dead on the carpet. The other 2, even injured, turned instantly. The back door burst open, and Miguel entered. No mask, no attempt to hide, no hesitation about who he had come to save. He shot the second man before he could lift his weapon. The third, bleeding from the cut she had inflicted, tried to escape through the window, but Miguel took him down with a precise strike, breaking his wrist before grabbing him by the collar. "Who sent you?" Miguel shouted. The man spat blood, laughing viciously. "Your father," he answered. "He wanted to see if you'd let her die." Miguel's face changed. Something dark, deep, shattered. He dropped the man and ran to her. Hey, stay with me," he said, kneeling beside her, holding her face with trembling hands. She was breathing with difficulty, her body shaking from the electric shock. You found me?" she managed to say between pain and breath. I wasn't going to let them hurt you, Miguel murmured, his voice cracking for the first time. Never. He helped her sit up, pulling her against his chest as he quickly checked her pulse, reflexes, breathing. Are you okay? Did they hurt you? He asked, desperate, like his life depended on her answer. She tried to respond, but her throat tightened. Not because of the shock, but because of what she had just heard. He wanted to see if you'd let her die. The cartel had used her as a test to measure whether Miguel was loyal to them or not. If he failed, she'd be dead. If he saved her, now he was marked as a traitor. She gripped his shirt tightly. You risked your life for me. Miguel closed his eyes for a second, as if the question hurt. I'd do it again, he said firmly. As many times as it takes. And in that moment, with the apartment destroyed, bodies on the floor, distant, sirens approaching and dried blood on his face, she realized there was no separating anymore. Miguel was no longer just a source, no longer just an informant, no longer just an enemy. He was the man who had just challenged an entire empire for her. And she knew that from that moment on, the cartel wasn't the only one hunting them. The DEA would hear the sirens too, and they would find Miguel inside her house, with no justification, with no explanation. And that would be the beginning of a disaster no one would be able to stop. The sirens sliced through the dawn like red blades tearing the darkness. She was still leaning against Miguel when she heard the sound approaching. He tightened his grip around her, as if he could protect her even from her own colleagues. You need to leave now, she whispered, struggling for breath but painfully aware of the danger. Miguel shook his head. I'm not leaving you like this. If they find you here, it's over. For me and for you. She squeezed his hand with what little strength she had left. Go, please. Miguel hesitated for a second. One single second. The kind of second that defines destinies. But then he heard boots pounding up the stairs, voices shouting commands, guns being loaded. He looked at her one last time, that look full of fear, guilt, and something neither had the courage to name, and then slipped out through the back door, disappearing into the shadows moments before the first agent burst through the front entrance. Daiaki, drop your weapon. Several agents stormed into the apartment at once, guns drawn in every direction. She was on the floor, still breathing unevenly. One agent rushed toward her, checking her vitals. She's been hit with a stun baton. Call paramedics. Meanwhile, others scanned the apartment. The questions fired instantly. Who attacked you? Why is your door blown open? Where are the intruders? Are you running an unauthorized operation? She answered everything she could. Everything. That didn't involve Miguel. But the scene was impossible to control. 3 bodies, signs of a violent struggle, clear evidence of a break-in, and one fatal detail, wet footprints leading out the back. One of the agents followed the trail outside and found something that made everyone's neck freeze. It ended abruptly at the street, where a black SUV had sped off minutes earlier. They didn't have proof of anything yet, but they had enough to suspect everything. 2 hours later, she was at DEA headquarters, not at her desk, in an interrogation room. Harsh lights, a red camera blinking. The door locked from the inside. Her boss walked in wearing the expression of a man holding a bomb about to explode. He sat down, opened a folder, and placed 3 photographs in front of her. Each one made her heart drop. A security camera image of Miguel entering through the alley behind her building. The same camera showing him leaving minutes before the DEA arrived. And finally, a drone capture of the same man seen at the warehouse weeks earlier. The man she never mentioned in her official report. Who the hell is he? Her boss asked bluntly. She inhaled deeply, tried to stay in control, tried to be an agent, but she wasn't sure she still could. I don't know his name, she lied firmly. He showed up during the attack, then he ran. Her boss slammed his hand on the table. Don't lie to me. You've been compromised. Someone is leaking information to you, or you're leaking it to someone. Your logs don't match, your routes don't match, and now a confirmed cartel member was seen inside your apartment. She swallowed hard. He broke in while I was unconscious. I didn't have a choice. There were 3 dead men there, he snapped. One of them was killed with a clean, precise shot. You could barely lift your weapon, so let me ask you again. Who is he? She stayed silent, not because she didn't know what to say, but because any answer would put Miguel in a grave that exact minute. Her boss exhaled sharply, closed the folder, then delivered the sentence that shattered everything. Until we figure out what the hell is going on, you're suspended. Badge and gun. Now. The room felt too small, the air too heavy. She removed her badge slowly, as if tearing off part of herself, then handed over her gun, her fingers shaking. You're under investigation, her boss added. Until proven otherwise, you are considered compromised and possibly involved with the Herrera cartel. And just like that, she stopped being the hunter. She became the hunted. Hours later, alone in her destroyed apartment, she received a message that never should have reached her. I'm sorry. I had no choice. Meet me at the safe house. We don't have much time. M. Her heart pounded, the world collapsing around her, the DEA turning against her, the cartel wanting her dead, and Miguel being the only thin line between survival and disappearance. She knew going to him was suicide, but not going was worse. And for the first time, she understood the full gravity of what they were living. They were no longer just secret allies. They were fugitives from both sides of the law. She reached the safe house just before sunrise, her hood pulled low over her face and her hands trembling. It wasn't just fear of the DEA, nor just the threat of the cartel. It was everything happening at once, crushing her chest as if the world were collapsing inward. The place was an empty warehouse, hidden behind a junkyard invisible to any normal surveillance. And yet, when she pushed the rusty door open, she felt as though she were crossing a line no one else could ever cross with her. Miguel was inside, pacing back and forth, his face carved with tension. When he saw her, he stopped immediately, as if air finally returned to his lungs. You're late, he said, but his voice was relief, not accusation. She pulled off her hood, revealing her tired eyes, messy hair, and an expression caught between anger and worry. I was interrogated, suspended, investigated, she said, walking toward him. The DEA thinks I'm involved with you. They think I'm leaking information, my badge, my job. Everything was ripped away from me. Miguel closed his eyes for a moment, painfully aware of what that meant. I'm sorry, he murmured. I tried to prevent this, but my father, he's gone too far, and he's not stopping. What did he find out? She asked. Miguel inhaled deeply, as if preparing to reveal something he had carried for years. He knows someone in the inner circle is betraying the organization. He doesn't know it's me. Not yet, but... Miguel hesitated, and that alone was more alarming than any confession. He has a list of suspects, and you're on that list. She didn't react with shock, because she had already expected it, already knew her life hung by a thread caught between 2 forces capable of destroying everything. That's not all, Miguel continued. He placed a thick, heavy envelope on the table. She looked at it, then at him, feeling a dark sense of urgency fill the air. What is that? Miguel rubbed a hand over his face, as if the words cut him from the inside. The truth. About my father, about the cartel, and about something no one at the DEA could ever imagine. She opened the envelope carefully. Inside were photographs, many of them, some old, some recent, and documents, spreadsheets, printed audio transcripts, maps, diagrams, too much to absorb at once. What is all this? She repeated, her voice lower now. Miguel pointed to a satellite photo showing a line of trucks moving along a route that wasn't supposed to exist. My father isn't just running a cartel, he's funding paramilitary groups in Mexico and the United States, buying politicians, judges, agents, including people inside the DEA. Her heart nearly stopped. What? He's infiltrated both sides of the border, and anyone who gets too close to the truth just disappears, Miguel said. You were getting too close without knowing it, and when I pulled you out of that warehouse, I handed you the same fate he reserves for anyone who threatens his empire. A chill shot up her spine. This wasn't just a case. It wasn't about drugs, weapons, or money anymore. It was about a silent war controlled by a man capable of toppling governments, and Miguel had just placed the heart of that war in her hands. "Do you understand what this means?" he asked. She looked at him, the envelope open between them. Yes, she understood. It meant saving her career was no longer the mission. It meant the DEA couldn't be trusted. It meant the cartel wasn't just hunting them, it was hunting anyone who got too close. Miguel took a step closer. "I gave you everything," he said, his voice carrying something deeper than fear. "Now you know who I really am, what I really carry, what I can destroy, and what I can lose." She swallowed hard. "Why tell me this? This could get you killed." "Because if I die, you're the only person who can bring him down," Miguel replied. "And because," he hesitated, his eyes locked with hers, "I trust you, more than I've ever trusted anyone." Her breath faltered for a moment, not because she didn't expect it, but because part of her had expected it since the day he saved her in that warehouse, since the day he appeared in her home, since the moment their world began to collapse around them. Miguel closed the final distance between them, standing close enough for her to feel his breath on her skin. "Now you have a choice," he whispered. "Run with me, disappear, survive, or stay and fight to the end." She closed her eyes for a moment and realized nothing would be easy, no matter what she chose. Running meant abandoning everything she once was. Staying meant dying or killing, to destroy a man with limitless power. When she opened her eyes, Miguel was still there, waiting. No pressure, no force, only vulnerability, for the first time. The final choice hung in the air, heavy enough to touch, and she knew with absolute certainty whichever path she chose now, the life she knew would end forever.